I stepped into the CEO's office expecting the worst, a termination, a demotion, or getting pulled from the biggest project of my career. But the powerful woman behind the desk wasn't talking about work at all. She closed the door, lowered her voice, and whispered 5 words that shattered my world. I'm pregnant, and it's yours. That one night, that single mistake from a few months back had come back to collect its debt. Allison Sterling, the untouchable ice queen of Sterling and Associates, sat across from me in our Manhattan office, high above the New York City skyline, waiting for my response. The only question left was whether I would run or step into the storm. Before I dive deeper into my story, I'd love to know where you're listening from today. Drop your city or state in the comments. And if you're new here, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss how this journey unfolds. I had spent years building a life that left no room for mistakes. As a senior project manager at Sterling and Associates, one of the most prestigious financial consulting firms in the country, I understood the unwritten rules better than anyone. Be early, be prepared, be invisible when necessary, indispensable when it mattered. Never give them a reason to question you. Being a black man in a boardroom full of people who didn't look like me had taught me one fundamental truth. Perfection wasn't optional, it was survival. I had learned this lesson long before corporate America. I had learned it watching my father work double shifts only to be passed over for promotions that went to less qualified men. I had learned it in college where professors questioned whether my scholarship was truly merit-based. And I had learned it most painfully years ago, standing in a hospital room holding my wife's hand as she took her last breath. Jessica had been the love of my life. When a drunk driver ran a red light and changed everything, I was left with my young daughter and a grief so heavy I thought it might crush me. But Hailey needed me. So I did what I always did. I kept moving, kept working, kept being perfect. Now sitting across from Allison Sterling in her corner office, I felt all that carefully constructed perfection crumbling. Allison was everything the business magazines described: sharp, calculated, relentless. At her age, she had clawed her way to the top of a company founded by her father, proving to every doubter that she belonged in that chair. The financial press called her the Ice Queen, a title she had never bothered to dispute. In the time I had worked under her leadership, I had seen her reduce executives to stammering messes with a single raised eyebrow. But right now, her hands were trembling. I've been to 3 doctors, Allison said, her voice stripped of its usual authority. The results are conclusive. I'm several weeks along. I stared at her, my mind racing through calculations I didn't want to make. Several weeks? That meant the company anniversary party. Allison continued, reading my thoughts. A few months ago. The memory hit me like a physical blow. That night had been an aberration. A crack in both our carefully maintained facades. I remembered staying late to finish a presentation, noticing the lights still on in her office well past midnight. I remembered knocking on her door, expecting to find her reviewing quarterly reports. Instead, I found her sitting on the floor, mascara streaked down her face, an empty glass beside her. My mother died this afternoon, she had told me, her voice hollow. I was in a meeting when it happened, a meeting I scheduled because I thought I had more time. I had never seen Allison vulnerable. I didn't even know she was capable of it. But that night, she wasn't the Ice Queen or the CEO or anyone's boss. She was just a woman who had lost her mother sitting alone in an office because she had no one else to call. I should have left, should have offered my condolences and walked away. But something about her grief had unlocked something in my own. I found myself sitting beside her, talking about Jessica, about loss, about the guilt that never quite faded. One conversation became 2 drinks, became something neither of us planned. In the morning, we had agreed without discussion. It never happened. We would return to our roles, boss and employee, CEO and project manager, and pretend that moment of weakness didn't exist. But biology had other plans. I'm telling you this as a courtesy, Allison said now, her composure slowly reconstructing itself. I've already consulted my legal team. There's no obligation on your part. No one needs to know you're involved. She reached into her desk and pulled out a folder, sliding it across to me. I recognized the gesture. It was the same efficient motion she used in board meetings when presenting acquisition offers. These are your options, she continued. Option 1, complete confidentiality. I handle this privately, and your name never appears in any documentation. Option 2, a formal agreement outlining limited parental rights and financial obligations. Option 3, stop. The word came out harder than I intended. Just stop. Allison's eyes widened slightly, the only indication that my interruption had surprised her. You're presenting this like a quarterly report, I said, like it's a problem to be managed. Because that's what it is. Allison's voice had recovered its edge. I didn't plan this. I've never wanted children, and I certainly never intended to complicate both our careers with a scandal that could destroy everything we've built. So, what are you going to do? The question hung between us. For the first time, I saw something flicker across Allison's face, uncertainty. The Ice Queen didn't have an answer. I don't know, she admitted. That's why I needed to tell you first before I make any decisions. I stood, moving to the window. Far below, the city churned with people who had no idea my world had just tilted off its axis. I thought about Hailey home right now with the babysitter, probably doing homework or watching videos on her tablet. I thought about what this would mean for her. A father suddenly entangled with his boss. Our family becoming office gossip. I thought about Jessica and what she would tell me to do. Don't live like life is a prison sentence, she used to say. You're so afraid of making mistakes that you forget to actually live. I need time to think, I said finally. Of course. Allison's professional mask was back in place. Take whatever time you need. My door's open when you're ready to discuss options. Options. There was that word again, as if we were negotiating a contract instead of discussing a child. I left her office without another word. The drive home felt longer than usual. Every red light gave my mind an opportunity to spiral into worst-case scenarios. My career was built on being above reproach. What would happen when people found out I had slept with my boss? It didn't matter that it was one night, that we were both single adults, that no professional boundaries had been crossed before or since. The story would write itself. Ambitious black employee sleeps his way into CEO's favor. I could already hear the whispered assumptions, see the knowing looks from colleagues who had always searched for reasons to doubt me. When I finally pulled into my driveway, the porch light was on, and I could see Hailey's silhouette in the living room window. My daughter, my reason for everything. Inside, the babysitter gave her usual report. Homework done, dinner eaten, only a little screen time, and left with a cheerful wave. I found Hailey curled up on the couch with a book, her reading glasses slightly askew. At that age, Hailey was already showing signs of the woman she would become. Smart, observant, with her mother's eyes and my stubborn determination. She had been young when Jessica died, young enough that her memories of her mother came mostly from photographs and stories I told her. Sometimes I caught her staring at old pictures, trying to hold on to something she could barely remember. Hey, Dad, Hailey looked up from her book. You're home late? Meeting ran long. The lie came easily, and I hated myself for it. Hailey studied me with that unsettling perceptiveness she had inherited from Jessica. You okay? You look weird. Just tired. Another lie. They were stacking up quickly. I busied myself in the kitchen reheating leftovers I had no appetite for. Through the pass-through window, I could see Hailey pretending to read while actually watching me. She always knew when something was wrong, she just didn't always push. Tonight, she pushed. Dad, Hailey appeared in the kitchen doorway. You can tell me if something's going on. I'm not a little kid anymore. I looked at my daughter, this fierce, brilliant girl who had already survived more loss than most adults. She deserved better than a father who hid things from her. But she also deserved a father who had all the answers, and right now I had nothing but questions. It's just work stuff, I said, nothing you need to worry about. Hailey's expression flickered with something that looked like disappointment. Okay. She turned and walked back to the living room. I stood alone in the kitchen, the microwave humming beside me, and thought about all the ways my life was about to change. That night, after Hailey had gone to bed, I sat in my home office, staring at a photograph of Jessica on my desk. We had taken it on our honeymoon, her laughing, me pretending to complain about the camera angle. "What would you tell me to do?" I whispered to the photograph. Jessica, of course, didn't answer, but I could imagine what she might say. "Since when do you run from hard things?" The truth was I had been running for years, running into work, into routine, into the safety of being so perfect that no one could ever find fault. I had convinced myself it was for Hailey, for stability, for survival. But maybe it was just fear wearing a more respectable mask. Soon after I arrived at Sterling and Associates early, Allison was already in her office. She was always in her office, visible through the glass walls that separated the executive suite from the rest of the floor. I knocked once and entered without waiting for an invitation. Allison looked up from her computer, her face carefully neutral. "Have you made a decision about which option?" "I'm not picking from a menu," I interrupted. "Whatever you decide about this pregnancy, I need you to know something. I'm not going to disappear. I'm not going to pretend this didn't happen, and I'm not going to let you handle this alone just because it's more convenient for everyone." Allison stared at me as if I had started speaking a foreign language. "Do you understand what you're saying?" she asked quietly. "If people find out, I know exactly what happens if people find out. I've been calculating those risks my entire life." I took a breath. "But I have a daughter at home who's going to grow up and ask me what kind of man I am, and I refuse to be the kind of man who walks away because it's easier." Allison was silent for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice had lost its sharp edge. "You're either very brave or very stupid. Probably both." Something almost like a smile crossed Allison's face, just for a second, just at the corners, then it was gone, replaced by the familiar mask of control. "I haven't decided what I'm going to do yet," she said about the pregnancy. "I know," I replied, "but whatever you decide, you won't be making that decision alone." I turned and left her office, feeling the weight of every eye on the floor following me through the glass walls. The storm was coming, but for the first time in years, I wasn't running from it. The first whisper reached me soon after. I was standing at the coffee machine when I overheard two junior analysts talking behind the partition. They didn't know I was there and they didn't bother lowering their voices. "Did you see Thompson coming out of her office again this morning?" "Third time this week." "I heard he's been getting all the premium assignments lately. Must be nice to have that kind of access." My hand tightened around my coffee cup. I had spent my entire career avoiding exactly this kind of speculation. Now it was finding me anyway, and the worst part was that the rumors weren't entirely wrong, just wrong in all the ways that mattered. I walked back to my desk without acknowledging the analysts, feeling their eyes follow me across the floor. Over the following period, the atmosphere at Sterling and Associates shifted in ways that were difficult to name but impossible to ignore. I noticed colleagues who used to stop by my desk for casual conversation suddenly finding reasons to be elsewhere. Meeting invitations that once included me as a matter of course now arrived late or not at all. The change was subtle enough to deny but consistent enough to feel. Allison, for her part, maintained her usual distance in public. She treated me exactly as she treated every other senior manager, with professional courtesy and nothing more. But I could see the strain wearing on her, the morning sickness she tried to hide by scheduling earlier meetings, the way she gripped the edge of her desk during long presentations, the careful loosening of her usually impeccable wardrobe. The secret was becoming harder to keep. One afternoon, I was called into a conference room for what my calendar described as a routine project review. Instead, I found myself facing Karen Cross, the head of human resources, and two members of the legal team I didn't recognize. Mr. Thompson, Karen began, her smile not quite reaching her eyes, we appreciate you taking the time to meet with us. Of course, I kept my voice steady. What's this about? Just some standard questions regarding your recent interactions with Ms. Sterling. Karen opened a folder in front of her. We've noticed you've had an unusual number of private meetings with the CEO over the past period, more than your position would typically require. I felt the walls closing in. Ms. Sterling has been consulting me on several high-priority projects. Our meetings have all been work-related. I'm sure they have. Karen's tone suggested otherwise. However, given the company's policies on workplace relationships, we need to ensure that all professional boundaries are being maintained. The questions continued for another stretch. When did these meetings start? What was discussed? Had there been any personal contact outside of work hours? I answered each question carefully, truthfully where I could, evasively where I had to. By the time I left the conference room, my shirt was damp with sweat. That evening, I found Allison waiting by my car in the parking garage. I heard about your meeting with HR, she said without preamble. I'm sorry that shouldn't have happened. I glanced around, checking for security cameras or other employees for anyone who might see us together. It's fine. I handled it. It's not fine. Allison's voice carried an edge I rarely heard. Anger, but not directed at me. Someone on the board is fishing for information. They've been questioning my leadership for a while, and now they think they found ammunition. What are you going to do? Allison didn't answer immediately. In the harsh fluorescent light of the garage, she looked exhausted in a way that makeup couldn't hide. I don't know yet, but I need you to understand something. If this becomes public, if anyone finds out about us, you'll be the one who suffers most. People will say you manipulated your way into my favor. They'll question every promotion, every project, every success you've ever had. I know. Do you? Allison stepped closer, her voice dropping. Because I've spent years in this industry, I know how these stories end. The woman gets called ambitious, the man gets called predatory, and if the man happens to be black, she stopped herself. But the implication hung between us. I had lived that reality my entire career. I didn't need her to spell it out. I knew the risks. When I told you I wouldn't walk away, I said, that hasn't changed. Allison studied me for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she nodded once and walked toward her own car without another word. At home, Hailey was waiting with a look I had come to dread. The look that said she had questions I wasn't ready to answer. Mrs. Patterson next door asked me something weird today, Hailey said as I hung up my coat. She wanted to know if you were dating anyone. I froze. What did you tell her? I said no. Was I supposed to say something else? No, that was the right answer. Hailey crossed her arms. Dad, you've been acting strange for a while. Coming home late, checking your phone constantly, barely eating dinner. Whatever's going on, I can handle it. I looked at my daughter, this girl who had already handled more than any child should. She had lost her mother young. She had watched her father disappear into work and grief. She had learned to make her own breakfast and help with laundry and be independent in ways that sometimes broke my heart. She deserved the truth. But the truth would change everything. And I wasn't sure either of us was ready for that. It's complicated, I said finally. Work stuff. I promise I'll explain when I can. The disappointment in Hailey's eyes cut deeper than any HR interrogation. You always say that. She turned and walked to her room, closing the door with a soft click that felt louder than a slam. Later, the crisis I had been dreading arrived without warning. I was in a budget meeting when my phone buzzed with an emergency notification. Allison Sterling had collapsed during a board presentation and was being rushed to the hospital. I left the meeting without explanation, ignoring the confused looks from my colleagues. The drive to the hospital felt endless. By the time I reached the emergency department, Allison had already been moved to a private room. and a cluster of executives from Sterling and Associates were gathered in the waiting area, speaking in hushed, urgent tones. I recognized the chief operating officer, the head of investor relations, and two board members. None of them looked happy to see me. Thompson, the COO, a silver-haired man named David Hayes, stepped forward with barely concealed suspicion. "What are you doing here?" "I heard Ms. Sterling was hospitalized. I wanted to make sure she was okay." "That's very considerate of you." David's tone made clear it was anything but. "However, this is a matter for senior leadership. I'm sure you understand." Before I could respond, a nurse emerged from the hallway. "Is there a Ryan Thompson here? Miss Sterling is asking for him." The silence that followed was deafening. I could feel the weight of every stare as I walked past the executives and followed the nurse down the corridor. Allison lay in the hospital bed, hooked up to monitors that beeped with quiet regularity. Without her armor of designer suits and perfectly applied makeup, she looked smaller somehow, more human. "Close the door," she said as I entered. I did, then stood at the foot of her bed, unsure what to say. "Preeclampsia," Allison said before I could ask. "Early onset. The doctors say it's manageable if I reduce my stress and take it easy." A bitter laugh escaped her lips. "Take it easy." As if that's an option. "What does this mean for the pregnancy?" Allison turned to look out the window. The city skyline was visible in the distance, the Sterling and Associates building a gleaming tower among dozens of others. "It means I have to choose my career or this baby because apparently I can't have both." I moved to the chair beside her bed and sat down. "That's not true. There are ways to manage this, delegating responsibilities, adjusting your schedule. You don't understand." Allison's voice cracked just slightly before she regained control. "I've spent my entire life proving I belong in that corner office. My father never believed I could run his company. Half the board still thinks I got the job because of my last name. If I show any weakness now, they'll use it to push me out." "So you'd rather risk your health? Risk the baby?" The question hung in the air. Allison didn't answer for a long time. "My mother gave up everything for her family," she finally said. "She was brilliant, could have been anything she wanted, but she married my father and spent years being his support system, raising his children, managing his household. And you know what she got for it? She died alone in a nursing home while I was too busy proving I wasn't her to be there." I saw tears forming in Allison's eyes, though she blinked them away before they could fall. "I swore I would never be like her," Allison continued. "Never dependent on anyone, never giving up my ambitions for someone else." And now she placed a hand on her stomach, a gesture so unconscious she probably didn't realize she was doing it. Now I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I reached out and took her hand. It was the first time we had touched since that night months ago. "You're not your mother," I said quietly. "And this doesn't have to be a choice between everything or nothing. But you can't do this alone. No one can." Allison looked at our joined hands but didn't pull away. "The board is going to find out about us, about the baby. David Hayes has been building a case against me for a while. This will give him exactly what he needs. Then we get ahead of it." Allison's eyes widened. "You can't be serious." "I've spent my entire life trying to be invisible," I said. "Trying to be so perfect that no one could ever have a reason to doubt me. And you know what? They doubt me anyway. They always have. At least this time I get to choose what I'm being judged for." The conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. A doctor entered, chart in hand, and began explaining Allison's treatment plan. Bed rest, medication, regular monitoring. The baby was stable for now, but the coming period would require careful management. I listened, asked questions, took notes on my phone. When the doctor left, Allison was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "You could walk away, protect your career, your reputation. No one would blame you." I thought about Hailey, about the look of disappointment in her eyes when I kept choosing easy lies over hard truths. I thought about Jessica, about the life we had built together before it was stolen from us. I thought about the man I wanted to be versus the man I had become. Because my daughter is going to ask me someday what I did when things got hard, I said. And I want to be able to look her in the eye when I answer. A short time later, I stood before the Sterling and Associates Board of Directors. The conference room high above the city was designed to intimidate, floor-to-ceiling windows, a table that could seat many, portraits of company founders lining the walls. David Hayes sat at the head of the table, flanked by board members who watched me with expressions ranging from curiosity to barely concealed hostility. Allison was still in the hospital, but she had arranged this meeting before I could talk her out of it. Mr. Thompson, David began, we've asked you here to clarify certain rumors that have been circulating regarding your relationship with Ms. Sterling. I stood at the end of the table, refusing the offered seat. I'm happy to clarify, I am the father of Ms. Sterling's child. Our relationship occurred outside of work hours and has not affected any professional decisions at this company. The room erupted. Board members spoke over each other, demanding explanations, expressing outrage, questioning everything from my integrity to Allison's judgment. David Hayes leaned back in his chair with the satisfied expression of a man whose suspicions had just been confirmed. This is exactly the kind of scandal we cannot afford, David declared when the noise subsided. Our clients trust us with billions of dollars. If word gets out that our CEO has been conducting inappropriate relationships with subordinates, there was nothing inappropriate about it. My voice cut through the murmurs. Two single adults made a personal choice that had nothing to do with this company. What's inappropriate is treating Ms. Sterling's pregnancy as a scandal instead of a private matter. You're in no position to lecture us about propriety, David snapped. Your judgment is clearly compromised. My judgment has delivered some of the highest performing projects in company history over the past period. My judgment helped secure the Morrison account when everyone else said it was impossible. My judgment is the reason I'm standing here instead of running from a situation that would be easier to ignore. The board members exchanged glances. I could see the calculation happening behind their eyes, the weighing of risk against reward, reputation against results. What exactly are you proposing? Asked a woman at the far end of the table. Patricia Powell, the longest-serving board member and someone I had always respected. I'm proposing that we handle this like professionals, I replied. Ms. Sterling's medical condition requires accommodation. I'm prepared to formally declare our relationship to HR and accept whatever oversight the board deems appropriate. But I will not pretend this child doesn't exist, and I will not let you use this situation to undermine a CEO who has increased company profits significantly in recent years. The vote took a brief time and went in favor of allowing Allison to continue in her role with increased board oversight and mandatory disclosure of her pregnancy to senior leadership. It wasn't a complete victory, but it wasn't a defeat either. As I left the conference room, Patricia Powell stopped me in the hallway. That took courage, she said, more courage than most men in your position would have shown. It didn't feel like courage, it felt like the only option. Patricia smiled slightly. That's usually what courage feels like. When I visited Allison in the hospital that evening, she had already heard the news. You didn't have to do that, she said. Yes, I did. Allison was quiet for a moment, staring at the ceiling. I've been thinking about what you said about not doing this alone. She turned to face me. I'm going to take the medical leave. Let David Hayes run day-to-day operations for the coming period. Focus on getting through this pregnancy safely. I felt something loosen in my chest. That sounds like a good plan, but there's something else. Allison's voice hardened with familiar resolve. When this baby is born, I need you to understand I can't promise anything. Not a relationship, not a family. I don't know how to do those things. I've spent my life making sure I never had to learn. I'm not asking for promises. Then what are you asking for? I considered the question carefully. A chance, that's all, a chance to figure this out together instead of separately. Allison held my gaze for a long moment, then slowly she nodded. The period that followed settled into an uneasy rhythm. Allison worked from home. attending board meetings by video conference, and delegating responsibilities she had never trusted anyone else to handle. I continued my projects at the office, weathering knowing looks and whispered conversations with the same quiet determination I had carried my entire career. But the strain was taking its toll on both of us. One evening, Allison called me with news that her doctors were pleased with her progress. The baby was healthy. The preeclampsia was under control. If everything continued on track, she could potentially return to the office later in her pregnancy. That's wonderful, I said, genuinely relieved. There's more. Allison's voice carried an unusual weight. I've been doing a lot of thinking about us, about this situation, about what happens after the baby is born. I waited, sensing what was coming. I think it's better if we end this now, Allison continued. Whatever this is, you go back to your life. I go back to mine. The baby will have every advantage, the best schools, the best opportunities. I can provide everything a child needs. Everything except a father. Allison's silence confirmed what I already knew. This isn't about what I want, she finally said. This is about what's practical. Your career is just starting to recover from the board meeting. Hailey needs stability, not more upheaval. And her voice wavered slightly. I'm not built for partnership. I never have been. I thought about arguing, thought about all the reasons her logic was flawed, all the ways she was using practicality to mask fear. But I also thought about Hailey, still frustrated about secrets I had kept, about my own exhaustion, fighting battles on every front. Maybe Allison was right. Maybe this was the rational choice. If that's what you want, I heard myself saying, it's what's best for everyone. I hung up the phone and sat in my dark living room for a long time, feeling something I couldn't quite name settle into my chest. The next morning, I told Hailey a partial truth, that there was a complicated situation at work involving someone I cared about, that it was difficult, but that I was stepping back from it now. Hailey listened without interrupting. When I finished, she asked only one question. Did you end it, or did she? She did. It was the right decision. Hailey studied me with those wise eyes. The right decision or the easy one, I didn't have an answer. In the period that followed, life returned to something resembling normal. I threw myself back into work. Hailey started the new school year. Allison's name appeared less frequently in office conversations, replaced by speculation about David Hayes's expanding influence. It was over. We had both made our choices, and now we were living with the consequences, or so I thought. A couple of weeks after our final conversation, I received a call from an unknown number late at night. I almost didn't answer. Work calls never came this late, and I had stopped expecting to hear from Allison, but something made me pick up anyway, some instinct I couldn't explain. Mr. Thompson, this is Dr. Collins from New York Presbyterian Hospital. You're listed as the emergency contact for Allison Sterling. The hospital system shows you were never removed from her file. I was already reaching for my car keys before the doctor finished explaining. Allison had been found unconscious in her home by her housekeeper. Severe exhaustion, dehydration, early signs of organ stress. She had been working long days since our conversation, attending video meetings from her bed, refusing to let anyone see how badly she was struggling. The baby was stable. Allison was not. When I arrived at the hospital, I found her room empty except for the machines monitoring her vitals and a laptop still open on the bedside table, its screen displaying an unfinished email to the board of directors. She was awake, but barely. The woman who had commanded boardrooms and intimidated executives looked hollowed out, her face gaunt and her eyes shadowed with something deeper than physical exhaustion. You shouldn't be here, Allison said when she saw me. Her voice was barely a whisper. Your doctor called me. I thought I had them remove you from my contacts. I pulled the chair close to her bed and sat down. They said I was never taken off the system. Allison closed her eyes briefly. I kept meaning to do it, I never did. I didn't point out what that might mean. Instead, I simply said, I'm here now. Allison turned her face toward the window. The city lights flickered in the distance, indifferent to the drama playing out in this small hospital room. I had everything under control. You nearly killed yourself. The words hung between us, brutal in their honesty. Allison didn't deny them. I thought I could handle it, she finally said. I've handled everything else alone. My career, my father's expectations, my mother's death. I thought this would be the same, but it's not. Allison's hand moved to her stomach, that same unconscious gesture I had noticed months ago. The doctor says the baby is fine. Strong heartbeat, normal development. She's a fighter. A ghost of a smile crossed her lips. She takes after her mother. I felt something shift in my chest. I found out last week I was going to. Allison stopped, shaking her head. It doesn't matter. I made my decision. This is my responsibility, not yours. You're right, I said. You made a decision, but you made it for the wrong reasons. Allison's eyes finally met mine. What do you know about my reasons? I know you're scared. I know you spent your whole life building walls because you watched your mother give up everything and you swore you'd never be that vulnerable. I know you think pushing me away is some kind of strength. I leaned forward, but I also know that lying in a hospital bed alone, working yourself to death because you're too proud to ask for help, that's not strength, Allison. That's just another kind of giving up. Allison's composure cracked just slightly. I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to need someone. I don't know how to be a mother or a partner or anything other than what I've always been. Neither do I. I took her hand, feeling her fingers tense and then slowly relax. I've spent years being so afraid of making mistakes that I forgot how to actually live. My daughter had to point that out to me. She's wiser than I am. A tear slipped down Allison's cheek. She didn't wipe it away. What are you saying? I'm saying that walking away from you wasn't noble. It wasn't mature or practical or any of the things I told myself. It was just easier than staying and figuring out something hard. And now, I thought about Hailey's question, the one that had haunted me for a while. The right decision or the easy one. Now I'm choosing the hard thing, I said, if you'll let me. Allison was quiet for a long time. The monitors beeped their steady rhythm. Somewhere down the hall, a nurse laughed at something a colleague said. I can't promise you anything, Allison finally whispered. I don't know how to be what you need. I'm not asking for promises. I'm asking for a chance to figure this out together, whatever that looks like. Allison's grip on my hand tightened. Together, she repeated, as if testing how the word felt in her mouth. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed, a text from Hailey. Dad, where are you? It's getting late. I showed Allison the screen. I need to talk to my daughter. Really talk to her this time. No more half-truths. Allison nodded. She deserves that. So do you. I stood, still holding her hand. I'll be back tomorrow and the day after that and every day until you stop trying to push me away. For the first time since I had known her, Allison Sterling smiled without any walls behind it. You're very stubborn. You have no idea. The conversation with Hailey happened the next morning over breakfast. I told her everything. The night with Allison, the pregnancy, the board meeting, the decision to walk away, and the realization that walking away was its own kind of cowardice. Hailey listened without interrupting, her cereal growing soggy in her bowl. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she asked, Do you love her? I had been asking myself the same question. I don't know yet. What I do know is that I can't abandon her, and I can't keep lying to you about who I am and what I'm doing. Hailey nodded slowly, processing. Is the baby going to be my sister? Half-sister? Yes. Another long silence. I braced myself for anger, for rejection, for the kind of preteen outrage I probably deserved. Instead, Hailey said, I always wanted a sibling. Mom used to say maybe someday, but then she stopped. Swallowing hard. I didn't think it would happen like this. Neither did I. Hailey looked at me with those wise eyes. You've been different lately. Sad, but also more, I don't know, more real, like you're actually here instead of just going through the motions. I felt tears prick my eyes. I'm trying to be. Hailey stood and walked around the table. Then she did something she hadn't done in a while. She hugged me. A real hug. Tight and fierce. Don't mess this up, she said into my shoulder. I'll do my best. And bring her over sometime, Allison. I mean, I want to meet the person who finally made you stop being so careful all the time. I laughed, the sound surprising both of us. I think she'd like that. Several months later, I sat in a hospital waiting room for the third time that year. But this time, everything was different. Hailey sat beside me, her leg bouncing with nervous energy. She had insisted on coming, had practically threatened mutiny if I tried to leave her behind. What's taking so long? Hailey asked for the fourth time in a short while. Babies come on their own schedule. That's a non-answer. I smiled. You're right, it is. The month since Allison's collapse had been anything but easy. There were difficult conversations with the board, negotiations about Allison's reduced schedule, awkward dinners where Hailey and Allison sized each other up like wary cats. But there had also been unexpected moments of grace. Allison asking Hailey about her favorite books and actually listening to the answers. Hailey helping Allison pick out baby furniture. Offering opinions with the confidence of someone who had been waiting her whole life for this role. The three of us eating takeout on Allison's living room floor. Laughing about nothing in particular. It wasn't a fairy tale. Allison still worked too much and struggled to express emotion. I still caught myself trying to be perfect instead of present. Hailey still had moments of resentment about changes she hadn't asked for, but we were trying, all of us, and somehow that felt like enough. A nurse appeared in the doorway. Mr. Thompson, she's asking for you. I stood, my heart pounding. Hailey grabbed my hand. Can I come too? I looked at the nurse, who smiled and nodded. We walked down the corridor together, father and daughter, toward a room where everything was about to change again. Allison lay in the hospital bed, exhausted but radiant in a way I had never seen. In her arms was a small bundle wrapped in a pink blanket. Come meet your daughter, Allison said, her voice thick with emotion. I moved to her side, Hailey close behind. The baby was tiny and perfect, with a shock of dark hair and eyes that blinked open to study this strange new world. She's beautiful, Hailey breathed. Allison looked up at me, tears streaming freely down her face. You came. I told you I would. I know. Allison reached for my hand with her free one. I'm starting to believe you. Hailey leaned closer to examine her new sister. What's her name? Allison and I exchanged a glance. We had discussed this, debated it through late-night phone calls and quiet moments stolen between responsibilities. Grace, Allison said. Her name is Grace. I felt something break open in my chest. Not pain, but release. All the years of careful perfection, of hiding behind walls of competence and control, of being so afraid of judgment that I had forgotten how to live. Standing in that hospital room with my daughter, my newborn child, and the woman who had shattered every expectation I ever had, I finally understood what my wife had tried to tell me all those years ago. Life wasn't a prison sentence to be served perfectly. It was a choice to be made over and over again every single day. I had spent my whole life afraid of being seen wrong, afraid that one mistake would define me, would confirm every doubt and prejudice I had ever faced. But I had been wrong about what defined a man. It wasn't the absence of mistakes. It was what you did after you made them. It was standing up when walking away was easier. It was choosing love over fear, presence over perfection, family over facade. Hailey reached out and touched Grace's tiny hand. The baby's fingers curled around her sister's, holding on tight. 3 generations, 2 broken families, 1 new beginning. Not perfect, not traditional, not anything I had ever planned, but built on choice, not accident, on courage, not convenience, on the simple, terrifying decision to stay. I looked at Allison, at Hailey, at the tiny life we had created together. "Welcome to the family, Grace," I said softly. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, I wasn't afraid of what came next. Thank you so much for staying with my story until the very end. Stories like this remind us that family isn't about perfection. It's about showing up even when it's hard. If this story moved you, I'd love for you to subscribe and join this community. We share stories every week about real people facing impossible choices and finding their way through. Hit that subscribe button. Leave a comment telling me what part touched you most. Looking back on everything that happened with Allison, Hailey, and our little Grace, the biggest lesson I learned is that life isn't a prison sentence you serve by being perfect. It's a choice you make every single day to show up, even when your heart is pounding and the world feels ready to judge you. For years, I hid behind flawless presentations and ironclad routines, convinced that one slip-up would prove every doubt people had about me right. But that night in Allison's office, when she whispered she was pregnant and the walls I'd built came crashing down, I finally understood. Mistakes don't define you. How you respond to them does. I could have walked away, kept my reputation clean, and stayed invisible. Instead, I chose the harder road, staying, owning my part, and letting my daughter Hailey see her dad choose courage over comfort. Watching her hug me tight and meet her new sister for the first time cracked something open inside me. Perfection had kept me safe, but love set me free. Vulnerability isn't weakness, it's the only way to build something real. If you're carrying your own secret fear right now, afraid that one choice will shatter the life you've carefully built, hear this: the storm passes when you stop running and start staying. You don't have to have it all figured out, you just have to take the next brave step. If this story touched that place in your heart where fear meets hope, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell me, what's the hardest choice you've ever made for love, and how did it change you? And if you're new here or just needed this reminder today, hit that subscribe button so we can keep sharing these raw, real journeys together. Your story matters, and I can't wait to hear it.